Well, this afternoon we continue our hearings with the submissions of the Temuka Catchment Working Party and the Temuka Catchment Group Incorporated. And I think, Ms. Hornsey, you're going to play some part in that. Is that right?
That's correct, sir. I appear for both parties.
And do we treat them as one joint case, as it were?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we have the original submissions of both of those submitters. We have evidence statements by Mr. Schreider, Mr. Porter, Mr. McKenzie, and Ms. Johnson. And we have legal submissions by yourself. Is that right?
Yes, sir. There is also provision for Mr. Webb to answer any questions that you may have. His evidence that was presented on behalf of Fish and Game also talks to the Temuka catchment, if that is of any assistance, and Mr. Webb is here this afternoon for that purpose.
Thank you. Shall we start with the submissions themselves? There's something I wanted to ask you about. In respect of Rule 14.5.7, the submission asks, I think it's page 18, that the word replace be deleted and the word substitute be substituted. And I'd like to ask, what alteration to the meaning of the rule would result from the proposed amendment?
It's probably a very good question, sir, that I'm unable to answer without perhaps giving that some more thought as to why that was a specific request.
Seems to be changing one word for another with very similar meaning, and I wasn't quite clear what the point of it was.
Yes, I'd concur with that, sir.
Now, there's a proposed new rule for the transfer of water permits to irrigation schemes. I hope I can find it. Yes. And in condition 4, it uses the word transferees in circumstances which I thought had been intended to mean transferors. And I just thought you may be able to help me with that one too.
Yes, again, I'll need to check that, but it does sound like a
much. Then in respect of table 14ZB, the reasoning that is given by the submitter for the requested amendment includes this. The TCG accepts that where zones are over-allocated, it is appropriate to cap allocation at current consented abstraction. And I'm wondering whether that's another statement which requires us to think about it in terms of the new NPS. Whether, in fact, the hierarchy of obligations about priorities no longer necessarily allows continued abstraction at the current rates.
Yes, I take your point, sir.
Except to the extent that there's a consent that's still alive and hasn't been reviewed. So you might like to come back to us with those at a time that's convenient to you, of course.
Thank you.
Now, which of the witnesses would you like us to go to first?
The first witness is Mr. Schreider, who's the chairman of the Working Party in the Incorporated Society.
Splendid. We'll bring this evidence up. Good afternoon, Mr. Schreider.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good afternoon, everyone.
We've read the statement that you've provided to us. Thank you very much. So you don't need to read it to us. But if you are intending to make an introduction to it or some further remarks, this is the moment to do that.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. Yes, my name is Brent Schreider, and along with my wife Hayley and my parents, we own a dairy farm operation in the Temuka Catchment. We've been farming in this area for 10 years. I'm currently the chair of the Temuka Catchment Incorporated and have been an active member of the Temuka Catchment Working Party since its formation in mid-2018. I'm also a member of Geraldine Water Solutions, who you will have heard from last week. The key mandate for the Temuka Catchment Working Party was to debate and determine an alternative flow regime for the Manch Bridge recording site on the Temuka River, so to balance ecological and economic impacts, utilising robust expert reports and to deliver a package of recommendations to the OTOP Zone Committee. This was a considered and democratic process with input from most stakeholders, including ECAN, Fish and Game, the Timaru District Council, who happen to be the largest water user in the catchment, and DOC in the early stages. There was also representation by water users in the agricultural, horticultural and food processing sectors. The expertise and technical support to arrive at our alternative regime has been provided by the people sitting beside me. The water users in the Temuka Catchment have contributed in excess of $120,000 to explore and arrive at the current solution options. There, however, has been one empty seat around the Working Party table over the past 2 years, and that was representation from Te Runanga o Arawhenua. We continuously sought to engage with local iwi over this process as we understood the cultural importance of the Temuka Catchment to their people. We want to understand the Runanga's concerns better, and we want to work together on this. That will mean making compromise and may not be perfect, but what we want here is progress. The low-hanging fruit in our proposal, as I see it, is reducing the initial paper over-allocation or unused consented water, and hopefully we can do that in a joint mechanism with ECAN. We need to assist all water users to complete accurate and meaningful farm environment plans to demonstrate a consistent level of good management practice. Having stakeholders identify and visit areas of particular importance and sensitivity, that may be around mahinga kai, it may be around riparian planting, and to work together to fund projects to enhance and make a positive change to our waterways. Just in wrapping up, the Temuka Catchment Group fully supports the proposed minimum flows and allocation limits in tables 14I, J and K, but does not support the final steps in table 14L, bringing forward the fourth and final step from 2040 to 2035. This will be the most difficult step and creates uncertainty. This uncertainty breeds anxiousness, and being anxious about producing food and contributing to the prosperity of our region makes no sense to us. Thank you.
Mr. Strider, you've come to give your evidence as the chairman of the whole group, and we thank you for that, and we thank you for the care you've taken in preparing your evidence statement as well. But we may have one or two questions for you about that if you allow us.
That's fine.
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions of Mr. Strider?
Yes, Mr. Schreider, I was going to ask Ms Johnston a question about the C block, but you mentioned that in your evidence, so I'll put the question to you. But if you want to defer that to Ms Johnston, then I'm happy with that. So it's a reasonably long question. So the 42A report has recommended to us that we delete the C block, because as I understand, the officers are worried about that leading to further over-allocation. Now, Ms Johnston has looked at the existing consented allocations, and she's recommended some amended numbers to us. And if we were to accept her amended numbers, then when I look at table 14I, as recommended to us by the officers, and the reductions in allocation that would occur between Ms Johnston's current figures and the figures in 2030, there's an overall reduction in allocation of 1,287 litres per second, which is quite a lot. If we were convinced, based on submissions, that the C block should be not deleted, namely it should still be available to applicants, would it be appropriate to cap that C block at that 2,807 litres per second, which would enable farmers, should they so wish to do so, to take high flow takes to compensate for the reduced normal allocations that are currently in table 14I? So that's the question, and if you want to defer that to the technical expert, I'm happy with that. But if you do have a view, I'd be interested in that.
I'll defer it for a start, and then maybe Ed after Kerry's spoken.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll wait till we hear from Ms Johnston, but do you understand the question? Okay, so thank you, but that was all I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
Commissioner Solomon, any question of Mr. Strider?
45 and 46, you talk about your disappointment at after inviting Te Runanga or Arowhenua to the table, and they didn't respond and they haven't turned up. I'm really sorry to hear about that. I'm sorry for your disappointment. And I acknowledge what you said about trying to engage with local iwi and to collaborate with them. I don't know why they haven't responded, but the reluctance to engage could be similar to what you have said in paragraphs 36 to 39. They may just have run out of steam from having to constantly defend their position in never-ending battles. And at your paragraph 69, I'm not at all surprised you received an A grade in your last FEP audit. With an attitude expressed in paragraph 67, it's a privilege to be granted consent to use fresh water. In my view, it's exactly the attitude that underpins the philosophy of Te Mana o Te Wai. So thank you for that.
Thank you. There was discussion with Arowhenua, but not formal. You know, it wasn't around a meeting table as such. So there was some discussion, but I fully agree they were maybe not resourced enough to attend, but I guess they were the only major stakeholder that couldn't contribute.
I'd like to say they're licking their wounds, but they'll regroup, and I'm sure they will come to the party eventually.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive
Yeah.
catchment and area, we understand that, so, yeah.
That's all from me.
Mr. Schreider, do you have a copy of the evidence statement that's in your name as the chair?
Yes,
Would you go to, I think it's paragraph 6. I'm not quite sure which page it is on the copy that you will have. Can you see paragraph 6 there?
yes, yep.
There was something I just wasn't clear about. I thought I'd ask you concerning the second sentence. You see, it's our consented surface water takes 119 litres a second of A water and 21 litres a second of B water and enable us to irrigate. Are these takes the same ones that are referred to in the previous paragraph 5?
Yes, they are. So we hold consented groundwater takes, but we also hold shares in Lake Opura in the scheme.
Yes.
So we have 2 water sources, but yes, that is relating to the paragraph 5 as well. They're the same takes.
Well, you see, in paragraph 5, they're referred to as shallow groundwater,
Yes,
and in paragraph 6, they're referred to as surface water. And so I thought, well, perhaps they must be different takes.
sorry, they're all shallow groundwater, so they're out of bores, but very shallow. We're talking a matter of metres here, 3 to 4 metres. Yeah,
All right, they're the same things.
so the same thing, yeah.
Source. All right. Well, I did want to clarify that. Now, just thinking about your evidence in your statement as a whole, would it be fair for me to think that the thrust of what you're saying is to postpone the restrictions on current consented abstractions so as to reduce the financial impacts on consent holders?
That's right. I think the water users need time, to work out for their own businesses whether it's investment in technology, whether it's looking for another water source, whether it's changing their farm system, to be able to remain profitable with less water or less availability. I do struggle a little bit with the big over allocation thing, because we know that a lot of the water is not used and may never be used, so that's why I referred to the low-hanging fruit. If we can demonstrate we can reduce the over allocation issue, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Oh, well, I've got the hang of it, I think. Then thank you, Mr. Schreider. I'm grateful to you. We're all grateful to you for coming in to take your part.
Thank you.
Who's next, please, Ms. Hornsey?
Mr. Mackenzie is here. He's another member of the Working Party and a member of the Incorporated Society, and he has filed a brief of evidence and is here today to answer any questions that the panel may have of him.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Mackenzie.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having us.
That. You've given us a statement of evidence also.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there something you want to add to it orally now?
I'd just like to add to Brent, just the over-allocation is the thing that is a big sticky point for us farmers in terms of it's over-allocated on paper, but we've got water meters and that and telemetry systems that can measure how much water we're actually taking. So whether we need to address how we have a starting point. If you've got the right starting point, you can fix problems from there, but it seems we're talking two different starting points, would be one of my things I'd like to say. And obviously as farmers we can adapt to, we're very good at adapting, resourceful people to adapting to different situations, solutions, but it's just hard if we haven't got a clear vision of where we're going. It seems it's a bit wishy-washy for our type of people, where we sort of want to be using the right data and the same data and agreeing on the data so we can go forward, is what I'd like to, my main point.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, any questions for Mr. Mackenzie, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No questions, thank you.
So, Mr. Mackenzie, understanding the need really for some certainty or some firmness about what's required to enable you and your fellows to carry on and develop your businesses, do you agree that you can't assume that past practices will remain appropriate, and that you may need to modify them for sustainability in the future?
Definitely 100%. Yeah, that's just the nature of the game, no matter what you're dealing with in farming. So, and that's what we are good at, and we're happy to do that and need to do that. It's just nice having a clear path to do that, so to speak.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think that there's any further questions. We understand you clearly, and we're grateful to you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Now, Ms. Hornsey, who would you like to call next?
Given the question that was posed regarding the C block allocation, perhaps we could move to Ms. Johnston.
Splendid, thank you.
Sorry, we're just shuffling seats.
Good afternoon, Ms. Johnson.
Good afternoon.
Are you intending to make some oral remarks before we come
No,
to
I'm not. So
questions?
I'm just happy to take questions, and if you'd like me to start with the C block question, then I'm happy to do so. That's
Commissioner Van Voorthuizen's question, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So we'll leave him in the position of asking questions first.
Right, thank you. So you heard the question?
I did, yes. So the short answer is yes, it would make sense to cap that at the amount that was obviously proposed. When we had pulled this regime together, we were obviously looking at allocation more in blocks rather than sort of as a whole, but and obviously had come up with the original allocation limit of 1,500 litres per second. But if it was to be reinstated, it does make sense that that aligns with the surrender.
Okay, thank you for that. I've just got a further question for you about table 14ZB, the groundwater allocation.
Yes.
So just let me find that. Just a minute. ZB, there it is. So, and in your supplementary evidence, you refer to the memorandum that the officers prepared for us, where they calculated the new current allocation numbers, and they presented three options to deal with that. You favour the option of reinstating a T block. I was just curious to explore the reason for that with you. Option one, which is not to have a T block, but just to use the notified numbers, and that then frees up or makes available water for anyone to apply for, because a number of these zones wouldn't be fully allocated. Wouldn't that achieve the same outcome as having a dedicated T block?
Yes, but I think my recollection is that the notified numbers for the Wrarri Opahi groundwater allocation zone, for example, are actually less than what the current allocation is, so it actually doesn't create any available allocation for the likes of Temuka to transfer off to deep groundwater.
Okay. So that's right. So let's have a look at that.
Yes, so from memory and that table, I think the proposed or the notified limit is 43.1 for Orari Opahi, yet the latest current assessment of the allocation is 60 something. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think the notified allocation limit was 71.1.
No, I think that's the current LWRP limit, isn't it?
Well, no, that's, well, unless I'm not reading this properly, which I might not be. Oh, yeah, so was it 43.8 they wanted that amended to?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, so 43.8 is what it was proposed to be under the notified plan.
Yeah.
71.1 is what is the current limit in the land and water plan. And, yeah, and the actual allocation limit, based on the memorandum provided to council, is in the 60s. Yep.
So what's your proposed solution for that zone?
That the A allocation limit becomes the current consented limit as assessed by ECAN, so the 60-something odd number
Right.
that it is.
64.22.
Yep. And that the balance between 71.1 and 64.32 becomes the T block.
Which would only be available to who?
So that's using Orari Opahi as the
Mhm.
example, but that would obviously then be available to the likes of the Temuka catchment water users to be able to transfer their shallow hydraulically connected groundwater takes or surface water takes to deep groundwater. So it wouldn't allow any straight new irrigation within that zone in particular, but it would allow those who hold existing shallow or surface takes to transfer to deep.
Okay, and you see that as preferable as opposed to just opening it up to anyone?
I think in line with sort of what the zipper intended was that it would be kept at sort of current allocation limits. I think it fits more with
Fits
that.
better with that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Could I just make one comment on that quickly? Certain areas of the Temuka, it's well known that you probably won't find deep groundwater. Some people have successfully. That could be 200 metres deep. And if you're prepared to take the gamble and drill a hole that deep, it's going to cost you, it might pay off.
Right.
Some people have got the deep wells, but it may not be an option for others.
And that's right, and to build on that, that was one of the other reasons for the C allocation block, was to provide as many alternatives as possible to these users who were obviously looking to create a significant decrease in the allocation at those low flow ends of the spectrum. We recognise that that's where the pressure is. It was to be able to offer as many possible options for them so that that surrender is actually a real possibility at the low flow end of the spectrum.
So Mr. Schreider, just in terms of your comment then, are you promoting a different view to that of Ms Johnston? Are you preferring an overall allocation block rather than a dedicated T block?
No, I think we need to explore all the options or have the option to do either. One comment I make on the C block is the high flow one, is that makes sense. Our rivers do flood a lot and there's a lot of surplus water, but the cost and the engineering involved to have a take into the river, to take floodwater, is quite substantial. You know, and on an individual business basis, it's probably not viable. Maybe as in a more community project, it might work a bit better to share the cost. But they're not simple. They're not simple alternatives. But I think we need the options.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes. Just given your explanation about the memo from ECAN dated the 23rd December to September, and there might be some spare water available in the Temuka catchment, deep groundwater. I'm thinking about a Mahingakai allocation. Was the only reason you said it should go to existing users is because that was the recommendation from the zone committee? Or is there a hydrological reason?
No, we actually also proposed, we actually had called it a cultural allocation as part of our package to the zone committee through the zipper. and actually we had offered that as a surface water allocation, so it would actually come off the irrigators and go to a particular cultural block, whether you want to call it cultural or mahingakai or whatever terminology you'd like to use. But actually, our whenua opposed us on that, and so, and I'm not, you know, their reasons are their reasons, but it was in recognition of the fact that actually there probably did need to be an allocation for that purpose, and where it came from, we'd put it out there to start that conversation off, but obviously it didn't go too much further than that. Yeah.
So I note in their submission, or at least in Miss Trina Davidson's submission, that they withdrew that as well. So, thank you.
No worries.
That's all from me.
Yeah. Ms Johnson, if we're talking about surface water in general, but we're talking about the Resource Management Act regime, we don't take all that we could possibly get for out-of-stream uses, because we think of cultural allocations, as we've just been speaking of, and we think of ecological allocations, to coin a phrase that we've been talking about and thinking about all the hearing really. Do the same apply to groundwater, even deep groundwater, or is it that there seems to be some discourse that seems to think that if there's groundwater there, we can have it, and the only issue is the risk and cost of getting it? Or do we need to have cultural allocations and ecological allocations for the groundwater too?
I think the setting of the groundwater allocation limits certainly takes into account the environmental aspect as well. So the way that the limits have been derived by ECAN in the past have obviously looked at a sustainable volume that can be abstracted from those aquifers without causing adverse effects, but as we know, there is some obviously over allocation that does exist within the region. In terms of the cultural allocation, I think it's totally viable that it could also be a groundwater option. That was obviously not something that we discussed as a working group, but from an overall perspective, yes. Yeah.
But when we think of what's sustainable, we're not only thinking of can we carry on drawing it out at this rate and it will still be coming out at this rate in 5 years' time.
Correct, yeah.
There's other sustainable issues as well. Are there, we know that there's natural life that belongs in groundwater. We have evidence in this sequence of hearings about the stygofauna. Do we need to allow for that too?
I think if it's appropriate to do so, then yes. And I mean, I'm not an ecologist. I can't claim to speak to what the stygofauna may need in terms of water. My brief understanding of it is that obviously it's a quality thing for them as much as anything else. But I obviously not my area of expertise. But if that is a consideration that needs to be taken into account when setting groundwater limits, then again, that is appropriate to do so.
Well, thank you for being willing to give me an answer, even if it's slightly outside your
my norm.
expertise.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can I make one comment actually? Obviously I haven't had any questions on it, and it is in regards to my supplementary evidence or my additional evidence that I supplied, which is in response to the council memo about the impact on the surface water allocations that the revision of the groundwater allocations have, and obviously the interrelatedness between them. I don't think I've seen anything from ECAN in response to that, but it is something that is really important. We're obviously setting surface water allocation limits in this plan, and the Temuka is no exception to that, which are based on the hydraulically connected parts of those takes from a shallow groundwater point of view. And so it would just be it's just really to make you aware as commissioners that that is still an outstanding issue from my point of view in terms of how those allocation, or the impact of revising those groundwater allocation limits on the surface water allocations.
Thank you. Now, I think that's all that we have for you, Ms. Johnson, on these particular submissions anyway.
Yes. I'll be back again tomorrow morning. Yeah.
But then we'll be able to proceed, won't we?
We will. Thank you very much for your time.
Ms. Hornsey, is there someone else?
Yes, Mr. Webb is here if there are any questions for him.
All right. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, do you have questions of Mr. Webb in
No.
respect of the Temuka?
No questions, Mr. Webb. Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, any questions of Mr. Webb in respect of the Temuka?
No questions from me either.
No, nor me. So thank you, Mr. Webb, for coming again. But we've no further questions for you. But we acknowledge your great experience.
Thank you very much.
So now we'll move on to Mr. Porter.
Yes, Mr. Porter, we have your statement, and we don't require you to read it out, of course. Are you planning to make some further remarks before we come to questions?
Just a couple of points, really, and also to reiterate a couple of things that Mr. McKenzie and Mr. Schreider have also said. I guess my analysis, while it showed that for A block holders, consent holders, that Plan Change 7 would be okay for them, it comes with the proviso that any adjustment to their water consents by way of reducing allocation limits does come at a cost to them. So it's a sort of a two-pronged...
Just pause for a moment, if you would, please, Mr. Porter. I wish to address myself to Council. To Ms. Hornsey. Is Ms. Hornsey there?
Yes, sir.
There she is, yes. Thank you. Ms. Hornsey, as you know, we conduct these hearings without formality, and that's what we want to do. And we've been accustomed to allowing a witness to make some introductory remarks orally, and that's worked out pretty well. Here we have a witness who qualifies himself as an expert witness, but seems to be extending beyond the scope of what's normally expert evidence, and seems to be expressing some opinion about what was said by other witnesses that you have called. And I'm just not quite sure whether that's exactly the way that we should be proceeding, or the way you are wanting this case to proceed.
I appreciate your concern, sir, and perhaps I'll ask Mr. Porter to confine himself to just answering questions that the panel have arising from his evidence.
Thank you. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, do you have any questions of Mr. Porter in this case?
Yes, just a couple of questions. Your paragraph 4.1, you describe your farm financial model being an Excel spreadsheet. Has that model been peer reviewed?
No, it hasn't. If I may just add to that, my model has been used in other Environment Court hearings in relation to the Lindis, which it was peer reviewed in that. It's the same model.
So who peer reviewed it in that case?
It was peer reviewed by an expert from Environment a North Island farm advisor who I haven't got the name in front of me, sorry. By the other side of the
Got a question in your para 411. And I may not be understanding your evidence properly, so my understanding would be that when the flows are above their minimum flows and there's no restrictions applied to the abstractions, that there'd be no reduction in irrigation depth. Farmers would just carry on irrigating as per normal practice. And therefore, wouldn't it be safe to assume no soil moisture deficit at the start of an irrigation ban or an irrigation restriction period?
Sorry, could you just repeat the first part of that question?
So when the flow in the river is above the minimum flow and assuming there's no restrictions imposed on an abstractor, there would be no reduction in the irrigation depth applied. So wouldn't it be better to assume no soil moisture deficit at the start of an irrigation restriction period?
Correct, yes.
And is that what you did?
Yes. Yep.
So, okay. So I obviously wasn't understanding your 411 properly. Okay. And did you, does your model take into account of a partial restrictions regime where abstractions might be ramped down before they're required to cease?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Okay. And just one final question at your para 9.2. Let me find it. And you say they're bringing forward the timeframes for implementing the PC7 steps, etc., only exacerbates the pain. My question is, would bringing forward those timeframes affect your analysis in any other way?
Yes, it would. And it relates to the ability of farmers to be able to plan and borrow. So if they are looking to mitigate and invest in better irrigation techniques or water, storage, then bringing forward the time frame doesn't help them to be able to access capital to do that. If they don't have the resources and they're having to borrow funds from a trading bank, etc. So the longer the lead-in time, the better it is for those farmers to be able to plan and borrow capital and make changes to their systems.
All right, thanks very much.
Commissioner Solomon, any questions for Mr. Porter?
No questions from me.
None from me, Mr. Porter, thank you. So, Ms. Horsey, is there something further that you would like to do to close the case, or?
I just have a response.
We've heard all the witnesses.
Yes, I have a response to two of the matters that you raised with me in relation to the original submissions. And yes, you're correct. Transferee should read transferor.
Yes.
And there is a semantic difference between replace and substitute.
Is there?
Apparently. So replace is to have a connotation of like for like. whereas a substitution might relate more to where it is substituting a shallow take for a deep groundwater take. So it is something different.
Well, we're always informed usefully by council, and thank you for that. Is there anything further by way of reply or completion of the case?
No, nothing further. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your assistance and for all of the members of the group who have attended, and for the witnesses that have been giving their evidence. Thank you indeed. I think just addressing Ms. Fernando now, do we have another submission to address this afternoon?
No, not this afternoon.
All right. Well then, I'll adjourn the hearing till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I think that we might have Mr. Williams and Fonterra at that time. The hearing's adjourned.
Thank you.